Okay, so are you ready for a deep dive? Because I am. This one is going to be interesting.
Oh, yeah. I think we found some really fascinating sources for this one.
We really did. You know how people have been asking us to do a deep dive into contrasting viewpoints?
Mm-hmm.
I think we really nailed it this time, right?
Absolutely. I think this is probably the most different two sources that we've ever had.
Yeah, and finding a common thread between them is going to be a challenge, but that's part of the fun, right?
It is. It is. It's going to be a good one.
So on one hand, we've got like the ultimate feel-good anthem, Smash Mouth's
The
All-Star,
ultimate pump-up song.
and then on the other hand, we have this really intense poem called Holocaust.
Yeah. Just that title alone, Holocaust, is
Ugh.
heavy. It's really heavy.
Yeah, and we'll, unpack all of the layers of that later, but for now, just let that sink in for a second. All-Star and Holocaust.
Quite a pairing.
Yeah. So let's start with All-Star. I mean, those opening lines. Somebody once told me the world is going to roll me. It's practically begging to be memed.
Right. I mean, it's so catchy, it gets stuck in your head, but then when you really listen to the lyrics, it gets kind of deep.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you move past the not the sharpest tool in the shed jokes,
Yeah.
you find these verses, and they're all about this pressure to succeed,
Mhm.
like even if you have to take the back streets to get there.
Yeah, and I think that's what really makes it relatable. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's this awareness of the struggle, the hustle.
Totally. And it makes you wonder, who is that somebody telling us to be an all-star anyway?
Right. Is it like society? Is it our parents? Or is it just, that voice in our own heads?
Because we all have it right, that pressure to be more.
We do. I think it's like this idea of societal programming where we feel like we need to chase these external markers of success.
Even if it means we end up on some weird metaphorical back streets to get there.
Exactly. And then it makes you think, okay, but what about our own definition of shining? Like, do we even get a say in that?
Yeah. And speaking of shining, there's this line, the ice we skate is getting pretty thin. Did you catch that?
It's like a climate change metaphor sneaking into a Smash Mouth song. That was unexpected.
Right. Out of nowhere.
But it adds this whole other layer of like urgency to the song, don't you think?
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's not just about achieving dreams anymore. It's like
Yeah.
you got to do it now before everything falls apart.
Because the ice we skate is getting pretty thin.
And it makes that chorus, go for the moon, hit differently too. Is it about breaking free, or is it like a last-ditch effort to grab onto something before it melts away?
It's a really good question. And it kind of makes you redefine what it even means to shine in the first place.
Right.
Like, is it about external validation or is it something deeper?
Yeah. Is it about being a supernova, or is it more about finding that inner light?
Maybe it's both, or maybe it's neither. Maybe it's something we haven't even considered yet.
And that, my friend, brings us to our other source for today, Holocaust.
And here's where things take a turn.
It's like stepping out of a stadium and into a really quiet room. All Star is all about energy and movement, and Holocaust just kind of sits with you.
And there's a different kind of energy there, though, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Holocaust has this really quiet intensity that's every bit as powerful as a stadium anthem.
It's in those quiet moments, in that stillness, that the poem really starts to work its magic. It really does get under your skin.
I have to admit, this one got to me, some of the lines in this poem. Your eyes are almost dead, can't get out of bed, and you can't sleep. It's just rough.
Yeah, it's like this feeling of being totally stuck.
Which is so interesting because it makes me think of those back streets from All Star.
Oh, yeah.
Like both of these pieces are about wanting to break free from something, right?
Hmm.
But with Holocaust, it's like you took those back streets and now there's nowhere left to go.
Right. It's like all the paths have closed in.
It's like the speaker is trapped in their own head.
Yeah, and the walls are closing in.
And then there's that line that just hits you right between the eyes. You're a Holocaust.
I mean, talk about a punch to the gut.
It's a really heavy line.
It is. It's definitely meant to make you stop and think. But what do you think it means?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge the weight of the word Holocaust.
Hmm.
The historical context with a capital H.
Right, of course.
It refers to the horrific genocide during World War II. And using that word to talk about personal struggles, it can be really insensitive.
Definitely. But in the context of this poem,
Right. It seems like it's trying to get at that idea of total destruction, like an all-consuming fire.
so it's more of a metaphor then.
Exactly. Like maybe it's saying that chasing after this idea of being an all-star, that constant pressure to achieve it can actually destroy you in the end.
Oh, wow. I see what you mean.
Like you become so burnt out, so empty that you're left feeling like a wasteland. And when you put it that way, it's almost like All-Star and Holocaust. They're two sides of the same coin.
Right. It's like they're both responding to the same pressures, but in totally opposite ways.
And there are all these little connections between them that support that idea.
Like what?
Like the Backstreets in All-Star versus being trapped and dead in Holocaust. They're both about feeling isolated, but in really different ways.
I like that. And it makes you wonder if maybe one could lead to the other.
Wait, are you saying that the Go for the Moon message in All-Star could actually lead to the kind of despair we see in Holocaust?
It's a question worth considering, isn't it? Like, does our culture's obsession with achievement come at a cost? Does it push people to the brink?
And are we setting ourselves up for a metaphorical Holocaust by constantly striving for more? It's a pretty dark thought.
It is, but sometimes facing those dark thoughts, it can help us find the light.
So it's like All-Star is almost a warning then.
Maybe it is like a cautionary tale disguised as a party anthem.
And if we're not careful that somebody telling us to go for the moon, they might be leading us straight into a metaphorical Holocaust.
It's a powerful way to put it, and it brings us back to that question of what it really means to shine.
Right. Because maybe it's not about becoming some kind of superstar.
Exactly. Maybe it's not about burning bright and fast and then fading away.
So what is it about then?
Maybe it's about finding a different kind of light within yourself.
Okay, I like that, a different kind of light. But how do we even find that light? Especially in a world that feels so much like Holocaust sometimes. You know what I mean?
I do, and I think a big part of it is recognizing that tension between those two extremes.
Between All-Star and Holocaust.
Exactly. Like, we need that drive to achieve, to reach for something more, but we also need to be aware of the cost, the potential for burnout and despair.
So how do we balance those two things? How do we go for the moon without losing ourselves along the way?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think there's one easy answer. But I do think it starts with self-awareness, with really paying attention to what drives us.
Yeah, like who are we trying to impress and why?
Exactly, because if we're not careful, we can end up chasing someone else's definition of success, someone else's version of shining, and that's a recipe for disaster.
It's like we end up on those backstreets without even realizing how we got there.
Exactly. So maybe the real challenge isn't about reaching for the stars, but about navigating those backstreets, about finding our own path and defining our own version of success.
Wow. That's pretty profound. I never thought I'd find myself thinking about existentialism after listening to All-Star, but here we are.
That's the beauty of these deep dives, isn't it? They take us to unexpected places.
They really do. So, as we wrap things up here, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's about remembering that there's more than one way to shine.
That's a good one. Don't be afraid to find your own light.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to embrace the darkness along the way, because sometimes that's where the most interesting growth happens.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those deep thoughts. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep shining your own unique light.
See you next time.